last session, we ended with Moses pleading for the people for God to have mercy on them. So in chapter 14 of Numbers, verse 20, it says, "So the Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word. But indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs, which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice." It's interesting that the Lord said he is going to pardon them and that the earth will be filled with his glory. And but he said, these people have tested me these 10 times. And it's interesting, throughout the Bible, that 10 is an interesting number. If you'll study that out, there's 10 is often used in times of testing. I think 10 days is what Daniel and the guys ate vegetables. It says in Revelation in chapter 2 or 3 that they'll be thrown in prison for 10 days. The 10 plagues, and 10 is pretty common as a time of testing in that. And here they didn't know, these people wandering through the wilderness didn't know that 10 times was kind of the end of it, that what had happened now is they really were disqualified from entering into the land. They didn't know that was going to disqualify them. But what we find as we go on here, none of this generation is going to enter except Joshua and Caleb, because they were faithful to believe God's word. In verse 30 then it says that, "Surely you shall come into the land in which I swore to settle. Surely you shall not come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joseph the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they shall know the land which you have rejected." And so here what God says is that none of this generation, the adult generation of that time, is going to enter into the promised land, because they rejected his word. They didn't obey. He still loves them. He's pardoned them. He's letting them live, and they go through the wilderness and have life. But then he says you used your children as an excuse why you wouldn't go in. He says they're going to get to go in. You don't go in. You use an excuse. And I think that's a really good warning for us in these days. We use some excuses, and oftentimes it is our kids. We can't bring our kids into the situation. Well, if the Lord has called you in that, I've seen several people, like even in the mission field, people say, well, I can't go there because I've got children. I've seen some of the most amazing children that are raised in the mission field. They have a world view that's amazing. They know how to get along with all kinds of different people. They know how to adjust to different cultures. But a lot of times we use them as excuses, just like they did in this time. We can't go into this land because of our children. And here, so God turns it around and says, you won't go in, but you know what? Your children are going to go in. The very ones you use as an excuse, they're going to enter into that promise, even though you didn't have the courage to follow through and do what I said. Verse 34, "According to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you shall bear your guilt a year, even 40 years, and you shall know my opposition." So God says, you're not going in, this adult generation is not going into that promised land. And the spies spend 40 days spying the land, and says you're going to spend 1 year per day in the wilderness for what they were in there. So 40 years you're going to wander in the wilderness. That wasn't good news at the time, I'm sure. That could be a real disheartening thing. God had mercy on them, let them live. He didn't destroy them entirely as a people. He's still going to give their children the heritage, but they won't enter into it themselves. And so, but they do become the link to another generation that at least will get to experience of that. So we see once again one of the themes is this continual complaining and the opposition of authority. And like I say, in the book of Numbers, the picture of Moses is more a picture of Christ. So when they're opposing Moses, they're opposing the absolute, more the absolute word of God, that direction of God. We see it happen again in chapter 16 with a man named Korah. It says, verse 1, "Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took action." Okay, this is a group, they take action. They rose up before Moses together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. So here's some of the main leaders rise up against Moses. They're kind of tired. They don't like all these things that have happened. They don't like being rejected and not going into the promised land. They don't like wandering in the wilderness, not eating the meat and the leeks and the onions that they had in Egypt. They forgot they were slaves once again. And it says, and they assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, verse 3, you have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy. Once again, they're saying, hey, we're as good as you. And they're not able to accept that there can be a distinction as to how God's speaking and who he's speaking through. Every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord? When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Here Moses again falls on his face. He's not proclaiming. He didn't say, hey, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who you're talking to? You don't know who you're talking to. He didn't do that kind of thing. He humbled himself before the Lord. He was the most humble man on the face of the earth. It wasn't his idea to lead Israel. It was God's idea. So when he hears this rebellion, all he does is he falls on his face and pleads before God on behalf of, Lord, you do something. I'm not going to defend myself. If something's going to happen here, you defend me. You chose this. You sent me. You designated me to do these things. And so this insurrection arises here, this rebellion. Verse 29, Moses speaks and says, if these men die, the death of all men, and if they suffer the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand that these men have spurned the Lord. Okay, now that is something. So he's saying, hey, if these guys just die normal death, like anybody else would die, then the Lord didn't send me. But if there's a special thing, if the earth opens up and swallows them, then you know that they've spurned the Lord. That's pretty bold stuff, and you've got to have a real direct word of the Lord. You need to really be hearing from God to say something like that. And of course, what we find out is that the earth did open up and swallow them. And it was the Lord that was designated Moses. And so, what we see is this rebellion continues. The humility of Moses continues. The picture of him just being dependent on God as he falls on his face and he falls on his face. We see that over and again. But what we go on is we get to verse 41, and it says this, but on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, you are the ones who have caused the death of the Lord's people. So after the earth opened up and swallowed them up, the people start complaining again, saying, you killed these people. It's your fault. Well, it wasn't Moses' fault. God spoke something of what he was going to do, and they had spurned the Lord, and that's what, the Lord acted. Moses couldn't open the earth. The Lord opened the earth. So in verse 42, it came about, however, when the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron, that they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. So once again, the Lord makes a distinction by appearing in a physical manifestation, of his glory, to say, you really need to beware of what you're saying, and you need to be careful of what you're talking about. Just shooting off these words and saying these things, maybe that's what you feel, but it really doesn't fall in place with what God's really doing at this time. It's like they're saying, we want it our way and we want all the benefits, even though we live whatever way we want to live. And that's common to man. Verse 45, it says, 44, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. Okay, once again, God is saying, I'm going to take care of these people, Moses. And then what does Moses do? Then they fell on their faces, Moses and Aaron. Once again, how many times in Numbers do they fall on their faces in humility? And Moses said to Aaron, take your censer and put it in fire from the altar and lay incense on it. Then bring it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone forth from the Lord, the plague has begun. And so we see that Aaron and Moses intercede on behalf of all Israel again. And they fall on their faces. They make the intercession by this censer, and to make atonement for the people. And it says that verse 47, then Aaron took it as Moses had spoken and ran into the midst of the assembly, for behold, the plague had begun among the people. So he put on the incense and made atonement for the people, and he took his stand between the dead and the living, so that the plague was checked. And so we see once again, even though God is saying to Moses, get out of the way, I'll use you. Let me get rid of these people. Moses once again shows that spirit of intercession, and in the heart of Christ, what we see later on in our scriptures, when he goes to the cross himself, giving up his own life for the sake of the whole rest of the congregation.